License and registration. Step out of the vehicle, sir.
Officer, why am I being asked to exit the vehicle?
You don't ask questions. You follow instructions.
I'm just trying to understand what I did wrong.
Shut up!
The dashboard camera kept recording as Officer Calvin Rowe pushed his knee into the neck of a man wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. He did not know that the man under him had just returned from serving his country overseas. The man, Army Surgeon Daniel Carter, had done nothing wrong. He had only asked why he was being ordered out of his car. In 47 seconds, a simple traffic stop would turn into a national story that would destroy everything Calvin thought his badge protected. But those 47 seconds had not yet happened. For the moment, Calvin believed he was in full control. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. This story needs to be heard, and your support helps us share it. Thank you, and let's continue. Daniel Carter was driving home from Fort Dawson in South Carolina after a 6-month deployment overseas. He had changed out of his uniform at the base because he wanted to feel like a normal person again, even if it was only during the long drive home. He wore a simple brown t-shirt, blue jeans, and running shoes. His military gear was packed in his duffel bag inside the trunk, hidden away. His body still worked on a different time zone, and his mind carried memories of things he wished he could forget. He was 32 years old, had served for 11 years, and had just been promoted to surgeon. The promotion meant more trust from the military and more weight on his shoulders. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March when Daniel saw blue lights flashing behind him. He was passing through a small town called Ridgeway Hills, a quiet place with fewer than 4,000 people. He had never heard of it before. He was simply driving through on his way to his mother's house 2 hours north. The sign said the speed limit was 45, and his speedometer showed 42. He knew he was not speeding. His license was valid. His registration was current. He had nothing to hide. There was no reason for this stop, or at least no reason he could imagine. He pulled over right away, shifted the car into park, turned on the inside light, and placed both hands on the steering wheel. This was what his father had taught him when he got his license at age 16. His father had sat him down and explained how to stay safe during a traffic stop while being a black man in America. Keep your hands where they can be seen. Move slowly. Do not argue on the road. Be respectful. Live first. Fight the injustice later. At 16, Daniel had felt angry and embarrassed during those lessons. At 32, he understood exactly why they mattered. Officer Calvin Rowe, 41 years old, walked toward the car. His hand rested on his gun, even though the night was quiet and calm. Calvin had been with the Ridgeway Hills Police Department for 19 years. He had 3 complaints of excessive force, but all had been dismissed. His file had notes about his aggressive behavior, but those notes never turned into real punishment. In a department with only a few officers, everyone protected each other, and no one wanted trouble. Calvin knocked on the window with his flashlight. Daniel lowered it slowly, keeping his hands visible. The bright light hit Daniel's face and stayed there longer than needed. Daniel did not move. After everything he had faced overseas, a flashlight in his eyes did not scare him. Without greeting or explanation, Calvin demanded his license and registration. Daniel calmly explained where they were before reaching for them. He moved slowly and gave the officer both items. Calvin took longer than needed to examine the documents. He saw the name Daniel Carter, saw the out-of-state address, saw the clean record. Nothing on the paper showed Daniel had spent the last half year in a dangerous zone helping save the lives of other soldiers. Then Calvin said the words that changed everything. He told Daniel to step out of the vehicle. He did not explain why. He did not give a reason. Daniel asked a simple question. Why am I being asked to exit the vehicle? It was not disrespect. It was not resistance. It was simply a question. Those 4 words lit something dangerous in Calvin. In seconds, everything changed. Daniel's door flew open. A strong hand grabbed his arm and yanked him out of the seat. He had no time to react. Before he could stand properly, Calvin spun him around and slammed him against the side of the car. The shock stole Daniel's breath. His military training pushed his body to defend itself, but he forced himself to stay still. He knew that any movement could be called resistance, and resistance could mean death. Daniel's arms were twisted behind him with so much force that sharp pain shot through his shoulders. Handcuffs were snapped on far too tightly. He was thrown to the ground, his face scraping the gravel. Then he felt it, the full weight of a man pressing a knee into the back of his neck. He could barely breathe. The pressure was crushing. Panic rose in his chest, but he swallowed it down. He did not move. He did not fight back. He just stayed there and hoped he would live. The dashboard camera captured everything. The angle was not perfect, but it was clear enough. The audio recorded Daniel's strained voice saying, "My military. What did I do wrong?" It recorded Calvin telling him to shut up. It recorded the scrape of gravel, the sound of Daniel trying to breathe, and the 47 seconds of violence that would soon travel across the world. Calvin called for backup during those 47 seconds. He reported that the suspect was resisting arrest and might be dangerous. None of that was true, but it was now part of the official radio record. Looking at Daniel in simple clothes, Calvin saw what he wanted to see. Not a soldier, not a man who served his country, but a person he believed he could dominate without consequence. 2 more patrol cars arrived after about 6 minutes. Officers Mason Hale and Derek Cole stepped out and saw their coworker kneeling on a handcuffed man who was not resisting at all. Mason, the younger one who had only been on the job for 3 years, felt sick. Something was clearly wrong. But Calvin was older, more experienced, and feared inside the department. Mason hesitated, and in that hesitation, he made a silent choice to do nothing. Derek asked Calvin if he needed help, and no one stepped forward to stop what was happening. When Calvin finally removed his knee, Daniel was pulled up roughly. His legs shook. His balance was gone. His arms still burned from the tight cuffs. Pain wrapped around his neck like a band. Do you think Officer Mason should have intervened? Drop a comment, and let's discuss this. Calvin dragged Daniel to the patrol car and shoved him inside so hard that Daniel's head hit the doorframe. Another injury. Another pain. All for asking a question. Daniel stood very still after hearing Mira's words. He felt them like a stone thrown into deep water. He wanted to answer, but the right words would not come. All he could say was, "But why now? Why at this moment?" He felt his voice shake. Mira did not speak for a long time. She only looked down at her hands, rubbing her fingers together as if she was trying to warm them. Finally, she said, "Because holding this inside is breaking me, and it is also breaking you. You deserve to know the truth." Daniel walked to the small window. The outside light was soft, almost gray, like the sky was tired. He leaned his forehead against the glass and closed his eyes. He thought about the last 5 years. They were full of silent hopes, half-spoken plans, and the kind of waiting that makes a person older inside. He remembered every night they had prayed, every tear Mira had wiped before Daniel could see it, and every doctor who said, "Maybe next time." Now those memories felt heavy, as if they belonged to someone else. Daniel whispered, "I just wanted us to be a family." Mira stepped closer. She put her hand on his back, very lightly, like she was afraid he might break. "We are a family," she said softly. "Maybe not in the way we imagined, but in the way God knows is right." Daniel turned around slowly. He saw her eyes shining with tears she was trying to hold in. He thought of the words their pastor once told them. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who still choose to love even when they do not understand God's plan. But Daniel did not feel strong. He felt lost. "Do you remember what you told me the night after the last doctor visit?" Mira asked. Daniel tried to remember. There had been so many nights like that. She continued, "You said, even if the road is long, God will give us the strength to walk it." I held those words every day. They kept me together. Now I need you to hold mine. I am tired, Daniel, but I am not giving up. I am asking you to walk with me again. Daniel breathed in slowly. He wanted to be angry, but even his anger felt tired. He whispered, "I just did not expect the truth to hurt this much." Mira nodded. Truth often hurts before it heals, but it is still truth. She sat down on the small wooden chair beside the bed and held her hands together. She looked up and said, "I know you have questions. Ask anything." Daniel asked the first question that came to his mind. "How long have you known?" Mira swallowed hard. "Almost 1 year," she said. Daniel felt something twist inside him. 1 year. A whole year of carrying a secret this big. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice rising. Mira held her hands tighter. "Because I was afraid. I thought maybe God would work a miracle before you needed to know. I kept praying for a sudden change. I kept hoping for a different answer." Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. His shoulders dropped. He said quietly, "I would have carried this with you." Mira wiped her eyes. "I know. And that is why I was afraid. I did not want to make the load heavier for you. You already had so much on your heart." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You should have trusted me with the weight." Mira said, "I am trusting you now." There was a long moment where neither of them spoke. They could hear the soft ticking of the wall clock, each second reminding them that time keeps moving even when the heart wants everything to stop. Daniel lifted his head and asked, "So what do we do now?" Mira answered softly, "We do the only thing we have always done. We trust God. We keep walking. And we let His plan open before us one step at a time." Daniel felt a strange peace touch his chest. Not strong, not loud, but like a hand placed on a wound. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that pain was not the end of their story. He whispered, "Then let us walk it together." Mira gave a small smile. She said, "Together is already a miracle." They sat side by side in the quiet room. Nothing had been fixed, nothing had changed, yet something felt different, lighter, maybe even hopeful. Daniel thought again of the words he once read. When God closes one door, it is because the next one will open to a place you never imagined. He did not know where the new door was, but he knew they would find it. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to try. The next morning came slowly, like the sun was unsure if it should rise. Daniel woke up before Mira. He lay still, listening to the quiet breathing beside him. For a moment he wished the whole world could stay silent, so he would not have to face what the day might bring. But life does not wait, even for broken hearts. He stood up quietly and walked to the small living room. The chair creaked when he sat down. He held his head in his hands and tried to pray, but no words came. Only a heavy feeling stayed in his chest. After some minutes, Mira walked out of the bedroom. Her hair was tied back loosely, and she looked tired but calm. She sat across from Daniel and said softly, "Good morning." He raised his head and gave a small nod. It was not much, but it was a beginning. She asked, "Did you sleep at all?" He answered, "A little." They were quiet for a while, but the kind of quiet that is not empty. It was full of questions they did not know how to ask, and fears they did not know how to speak. Finally, Mira said, "I need to tell you everything. Not just the part about the doctors. I need to tell you what this year has really been like." Daniel sat up straighter. He looked at her face and saw no anger, only a strong kind of honesty. He said, "I am listening." Mira took a long breath. She said, "I was afraid of losing you. Every day I asked God why our story looked like this. I thought maybe I was the problem. I thought maybe I was not praying enough or believing enough." Daniel shook his head, but she lifted her hand gently, telling him to let her finish. I blamed myself, she said. I felt like I was failing as a wife. I felt less than enough. Every time you smiled at me, I felt guilty because I knew I was hiding something that could change everything. Her voice cracked, and she covered her face with her hands. Daniel stood up and knelt beside her. He whispered, "Mira, you did not fail me. You did not fail God. You did nothing wrong." Mira looked up slowly, her eyes red. She said, "Then why does it hurt this much?" Daniel did not know how to answer. Some questions do not have simple answers. Some pain cannot be solved by words only carried. He held her hands and said gently, "Because we are human, and humans break sometimes." Mira leaned forward and rested her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time, breathing together. It felt like their hearts were trying to understand each other again. When she finally sat back, she said, "There is something else. Something important." Daniel frowned. "What is it?" Mira hesitated. "I did not only pray for healing. I prayed for direction. I asked God to show us where to go next, even if the road looks different." Daniel looked confused. "Different how?" Mira looked down. "I think God is asking us to open our hearts to another path. Maybe adoption. Maybe helping children who already exist and need love." Daniel felt his chest tighten again, but this time it was not from pain. It was from something like surprise mixed with fear. He had never thought deeply about adoption. It always seemed like a story for other families. But now, hearing it from Mira, something inside him shifted gently. Like a door he did not know existed was opening a little. He said slowly, "Are you saying you no longer want to try?" Mira shook her head quickly. "No. I am saying I want us to stop fighting God's plan and start following it. Maybe the blessing God wants to give us does not come from my body. Maybe it comes another way." Daniel leaned back and looked at her carefully. She was not speaking from fear. She was speaking from a quiet strength. He whispered, "I do not know if I am ready for that." Mira nodded. "I know. I am not asking for an answer today. I am asking you to think, to pray, to breathe." She paused. "I want us to move forward together, not separately." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered something their pastor once said during a sermon. Faith is not always a door that opens. Sometimes faith is the courage to walk through a door you did not expect. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at Mira again. He said softly, "I will think. I will pray. I will not shut the door without trying to understand it first." Mira gave a small smile, the kind that comes after a long night of tears. She said, "That is all I ask." The rest of the day moved slowly. They cooked breakfast, but neither ate much. They cleaned the house, but their thoughts kept drifting. They tried to talk about everyday things, but the deeper questions stayed close, like shadows following them through each room. Yet even with the heaviness, something new was growing between them. A beginning, a rebuilding, a small, fragile hope. Later in the evening, Daniel stepped outside. The sky was full of stars, bright and gentle. He whispered a prayer, not perfect, not long, but real. "God, show me the path. Help me walk it." The wind blew softly, and for the first time in many months, Daniel felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a little. Only a little, but enough to keep going. When he went back inside, Mira was sitting on the couch with a soft blanket around her shoulders. She looked up at him, tired but peaceful. He sat beside her and took her hand. No words were needed. Their hearts understood what their lips could not say. And slowly, quietly, a new chapter of their story began forming in the spaces between their breaths. The next weeks moved slowly, like a long walk through deep sand. Daniel and Mira tried to return to their normal routines, but normal felt different now. Every morning, Daniel would wake up and feel the same quiet question inside him. What does our future look like now? And every day, Mira would watch him with gentle eyes, giving him space, not pushing him, not rushing him. She knew his heart needed time to bend without breaking. They talked often, sometimes about their fears, sometimes about their hopes, sometimes about nothing important at all. But little by little, their conversations began to change. They started speaking about adoption without whispering, without fear, without the feeling that they were betraying something. It was not a decision yet, but it was an opening. A doorway that once looked dark was beginning to let in a little light. One Sunday morning, their pastor, Mr. Rowan, preached a message that felt like it was written for them alone. He said, "When God closes one door, He is not punishing you. He is leading you away from a place that cannot carry your blessing. Do not stand crying at the closed door. Turn around and look for the door that is already open." Daniel felt those words settle deeply in his heart. Mira squeezed his hand gently. Neither spoke, but both felt something shift. Later, after the service, Pastor Rowan came to them. He looked at Daniel first and said, "The hardest battles are not the ones outside, but the ones inside the heart." Then he turned to Mira. "And God sees the tears that never fall. He is closer to you than your breath." His words were calm and steady, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt like he could breathe fully. That week, Daniel began reading stories of families who chose adoption. Some stories were painful, others beautiful, but all of them were real. He read late into the night, his eyes heavy but his mind alive. He realized something. Every family's path was different, yet each one had a kind of quiet courage. A courage he wanted to understand. One night, after reading another story, he closed the book slowly and whispered, "Maybe this is not a second choice. Maybe it is simply a different road." When he said those words, something inside him softened, like a knot that had been tight for too long. The next morning, Daniel walked into the kitchen. Mira stood by the window, stirring tea. The light from the window touched her face softly, and when she turned to him, he saw hope in her eyes, small but bright. He said quietly, "Can we talk?" Mira nodded and sat down with him at the small table. Daniel took a deep breath. "I have been thinking," he said. "I am not sure where the road will lead, but I want to walk the road God shows us. I do not want fear to make our decisions." Mira's eyes softened. "What does that mean?" she asked gently. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "It means," he said slowly, "that I am ready to explore adoption with you. I am ready to open my heart to whatever God has for us." Mira covered her mouth with her hand as tears filled her eyes, but these tears were not from pain. They were from relief, from release, from hope coming alive again. She stood up and wrapped her arms around Daniel, holding him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "We will walk this road together." That afternoon they went for a quiet walk. The world looked different. Trees brighter, air clearer, the sky wider. Sometimes life does not change around you, but something inside you changes, and suddenly everything looks new. As they walked, Mira said, "I want you to know something. I never prayed for a perfect life. I prayed for a faithful one, and you have helped me live it." Daniel smiled softly. "We are learning faith together," he said. In the days that followed, they began collecting information, papers, brochures, phone numbers, lists of agencies. It felt overwhelming, but also strangely exciting. Each step felt like placing a brick on a new foundation. A future was slowly being built, not by their strength but by their willingness. One evening, after reading through several documents, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He looked at Mira and said, "Do you think we are ready?" She smiled and replied, "We are not ready, but we are willing, and sometimes that is what God needs." Daniel laughed softly. Her words were simple, but they held truth. Being ready is not always possible. Being willing is enough. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, their hearts grew stronger. They faced questions, paperwork, meetings, and long waiting periods. Some days they felt discouraged. Other days they felt full of hope. But through it all, They walked together, step by step, with their hands tightly joined. One afternoon they received a phone call that made Mira burst into tears the moment she hung up. Daniel rushed to her. "What happened?" he asked quickly. Mira wiped her face and whispered, "They found a child who needs a home." Daniel felt his breath catch in his chest. They sat together, holding hands, hearts shaking with joy and fear. The next few weeks were filled with preparation, cleaning, planning, hoping, praying. Their home felt alive, like walls were waiting for footsteps that had never walked there before. Daniel often stood in the small room they had prepared, running his hand across the soft blanket on the bed, imagining tiny hands holding his. Then the day finally came. They walked into the small office where a little girl with bright eyes sat quietly, holding a small toy. Her name was Leah. She looked up at them with a shy smile. Mira knelt slowly and said, "Hello, Leah. We are very happy to meet you." Daniel stood behind Mira, his heart full. He whispered a prayer inside his chest. "Thank you, God. Thank you for leading us here." Lee reached out her small hand. Mira took it gently. Then Daniel knelt beside them. The three of them stayed like that for a moment, silent, close, connected. A family beginning in the simplest, most beautiful way. On the way home, Leah sat between Daniel and Mira. She held Mira's hand tightly and leaned gently on Daniel's arm. Daniel looked at her and felt warmth spread through him, soft and deep. It was the kind of warmth that fills empty places. Mira whispered, "This is the miracle we did not see coming." Daniel nodded. "God always knew," he replied quietly. When they reached home, Leah looked around with wide eyes. She walked slowly from room to room, touching things gently. When she entered her new room, she turned and gave them a small but bright smile. Daniel felt something inside him settle peacefully, like a long storm finally becoming still. That night, after Leah fell asleep, Daniel and Mira stood at her door, watching her breathe softly under the warm blanket. Mira leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. She said, "We did not choose this path, but it was chosen for us." Daniel whispered, "And it is beautiful." They walked back to the living room hand in hand. Daniel looked up at the quiet ceiling and whispered, "Thank you, God, for closing the door we kept knocking on. And thank you for opening the one that led us here." Mira squeezed his hand and said softly, "We are a family now." Daniel smiled. "We always were. Now we simply see it." And in that small quiet room, filled with the soft sound of a child breathing, their story found its new beginning. Not through the path they expected, but through the path that was always meant for them.